Morning. Welcome to what's going to be the first in a series of discussions produced by the Bay Area Council in partnership with the United States Department of Commerce. My name is Frank Holland. I'll be moderating the panel today. I'm the principal of Orso Creative Strategic, and I lead the council's Washington, D.C. office. So we're kicking off today's event with, our ongoing series with today's program about artificial intelligence. But we're going to be conducting similar panels throughout the year with key administration officials and industry leaders on issues including climate policy, CHIPS and Science Act, workforce of the future, and the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. So please stay tuned. Join us throughout the year for those conversations. I know they're going to be fantastic. But today, of course, we're here to talk about AI and the path forward for safety, innovation, and smart regulation. We obviously aren't alone. Generative AI has really captured the world's imagination, and the technology and its adoption are just moving at a breakneck pace. Perhaps even more so than even the early web, AI promises to both consume and be consumed by almost every conceivable industry. And when you add the backdrop of the potential existential threat that many believe AI represents to humanity, the stakes are almost indescribably high for regulators to get it right. And that means a tight collaboration with industry is more imperative than we could imagine. So I also have to say that it's appropriate that we're having this conversation here and that it's been convened by the Bay Area Council, because like so many other advanced technologies that have come before it, generative AI is really a product of our region. And once again, The Economist reported just this month that the future is being built in the Bay Area. Because that's where the imagination, the genius, the capital, the courage to innovate, they come together unlike anywhere else in the world. That's still very much the case. So we're very lucky to have just an incredibly impressive trio of special guests with us today. Saif Khan is the Senior Advisor to Commerce Secretary Raimondo for Critical and Emerging Technology. He previously served as Director for Technology and National Security at the White House NSC and as an IP attorney for a range of private technology companies before that. Jayne Stancavage is the Global Executive Director of Product and Digital Infrastructure Policy for Intel. She's responsible for Intel's policies related to digital infrastructure, including connectivity, artificial intelligence, autonomous driving, and IoT policy. So small portfolio there. And last but not least, Christian Troncoso is the principal for global AI policy at Amazon Web Services. And for many years prior to his current role, he served as director of policy for BSA, the leading advocate for the global software industry. So just an incredible group of folks here. I'm very grateful to be able to sit down with you all. I'd like to kick off the discussion by asking each of you to introduce yourselves maybe a little more, and please just give us a quick rundown of why your organizations are so focused on AI at the moment and in what ways. Jayne, I'd like to start with you if we could.
Sure, and thanks for having me today. It's a great conversation I'm sure that we'll have, and I appreciate the opportunity. So my team covers a wide range of issues, as you described, but really in terms of what Intel's doing, like you said, AI is everywhere now. We are providing chips for data centers, AI PC laptops. We just recently launched. I'm here at Mobile World Congress in Barcelona this week. We have AI in our 5G networks, edge compute. We do hardware and software. We work on secure AI, responsible AI. We also recently announced our Foundry services, and that would also provide process and packaging for AI. And then we do some R&D. So other than that, not too much more. Actually, a lot more, but that'll cover for today.
That's great. Thank you. Christian?
Excuse me. At AW, my name is Christian Troncoso. I'm principal for global AI policy at AWS, which means that I help manage our global public policy team and a subject matter expert on AI, working with policymakers around the world to sort of better anticipate what the regulatory landscape is going to look like and then work closely with our teams internally that are helping build our AI services, anticipate that as well. And Amazon has been working on AI for 25 years now. It's core to pretty much every part of the business. It's powering our e-commerce recommendation systems, the paths that optimize the robots that are doing the picking routes in our fulfillment centers, and it's doing a lot of our supply chain forecasting and capacity planning. At AWS, which is the part of the company where I sit, we're really focused on democratizing access to machine learning and making it accessible to companies of all sizes. We have more than 100,000 companies at this point that are using various parts of our infrastructure and our services to take advantage of what AI is enabling. We think of our AI offerings in sort of as a 3-layer stack. At the bottom of the stack is the sort of core infrastructure that we're probably most well known for. And at its most basic, that is providing cloud access to the chips that Jayne's company is producing, and NVIDIA, as well as the custom silicon that we're developing in-house, our Inferentia and Tradium chips that can help companies that are wanting to train their own models from scratch. We're providing the core infrastructure to do that. Sort of the second layer of the stack is sort of our managed services. This is things like Amazon Bedrock, which is our foundation model service that provides access to a range of the sort of most cutting edge generative AI models from Anthropic, from AI 21 Labs, Cohere, Stability AI, and then our own sort of first party models that we're training ourselves, which we market under the sort of Titan banner, which are both a large language model and text to image model as well. And then just briefly, the top layer of the stack are sort of just AI applications that make it really easy for companies to leverage very specific AI services. So I think probably the best example is Code Whisperer, which is a coding assistant that enables developers to enter sort of natural language prompts and request sort of features that the coding assistant will then sort of translate that natural language into code automatically. So that's sort of, we are involved in sort of every layer of the sort of AI ecosystem. But yeah.
It's incredible. Saif, can I kick it over to you?
Yeah, thanks so much, Frank. And thanks to my co-panelists here also for kind of speaking with me here. So yeah, under the executive order, there's around 8 or so work streams. There's work streams on safety and security, protecting privacy, advancing civil rights, supporting workers and consumers, promoting innovation and competition, advancing American leadership abroad, and ensuring responsible and effective use of AI in the government. And really, if you look down those, almost all of those, there is a commerce work stream relating to one of those areas. And if you just count up the number of tasks in the executive order, I think commerce is probably around the top. There's just a lot that we have ongoing. And I think there's a couple of reasons for this. One is, of course, Secretary Raimondo. I think she's proven over the last few years just all of the things that we've been able to get done under the CHIPS Act and other areas. And I think it's just a testament to kind of the agency really kind of being at the forefront of getting a lot of these kind of tech-related policies through. So that's one element. And the other element is obviously there are kind of a number of agencies that kind of can address specific kind of industry verticals where AI may be used. But if you really think about the place where kind of AI writ large and kind of issues that industry broadly is facing, given the development of AI, as commerce being kind of the industry-facing agency is really the natural place where a lot of this work lands. And so that I think is really put us up at the forefront in the tip of the spear for a lot of the policy that we're pushing forward. But I'll leave it at that and kind of move into the more specific discussion.
Thanks, Dave. I'd actually like to stay with you just a second, because that executive order is so sweeping, and like you mentioned, there are so many different work streams there. But as I understand it, it really does break down into two kind of primary missions: mitigating the potential risks of AI and using AI to innovate for good and maintain U.S. interests. So a lot of these provisions were on a 90-day shot clock for implementation. So I'm wondering if you could just give us kind of a thrust of the EO and maybe tell us how that implementation has gone in this short window.
Yeah, you're absolutely right to point out kind of those two areas as really some of the core focuses of the EO, and especially some of the work of the department. On the safety and security side, two of the 90-day deliverables, which have already kind of been completed, are one, we've issued a notice of proposed rulemaking for infrastructure as a service providers to know your customer and also report to the US government when there is a frontier model being trained on their compute resources. So that NPRM is already out. We have a comment period that we're in the middle of. So that is one piece. We are kind of gaining additional visibility for foreign actors developing these very advanced models for which we're kind of trying to better understand and characterize the capabilities and the risks associated with these models. And then relatedly, we also have a program, the Bureau of Industry and Security, which also implemented the infrastructure as a service rule, but also has issued an initial set of surveys to leading AI companies on the development and the safety testing that they're undertaking in their development and deployment of frontier models. For both of these programs, the thresholds are very high. We're talking about models that don't actually even exist yet at the frontier. Basically, we expect these models to soon be developed this year. But that is kind of a first tranche of work that we've done in the safety and security space. Another effort that kind of is cross-cutting is the AI Safety Institute. Obviously, the safety and security component here is key. We're hoping to develop, research, testing, and standards to ensure these models are safe, that they are secured from theft, and set out standards for that. And also, on the other hand, we want to make sure that we promote trustworthy and responsible use of AI, because I think we see kind of the safety and the security piece is very tied up in innovation, in the sense that once you know that these models are reliable and that they don't pose risks, that promotes trust and it unlocks innovation. And so in that sense, I think one of the key goals for the Safety Institute is also to kind of promote that innovation ecosystem for the United States. And then another piece that is a little bit cross-cutting is understanding the role of open source AI. The way it's termed in the EO is publicly available model weights. That's kind of the specific question that we're looking at for very advanced models. What are the benefits and risks when those models are out in the open? The EO tasks the department with looking at sort of the benefits, where there are quite a few benefits to the innovation ecosystem, and even frankly on the safety side, where so much of the safety research that has been done in this space has relied on open source models to really make them robust, very much like as we see in kind of the internet innovation ecosystem. On the other hand, of course, if very advanced models with advanced capabilities get in the wrong hands, there are certainly opportunities for misuse. So we have to think about how to mitigate those risks as well. So that report is in train, and we are just released an RFI just a few days ago. And then we will have a report that we're issuing soon. And then also on the innovation and competition side, we're answering a lot of key questions at the intersection of AI and IP. One bit of guidance we've already put out is kind of how patent eligibility, or inventorship, I should say specifically, how inventorship is impacted when you're using AI to create an invention. But we're also going to be looking at similar questions on copyright. And later this year, even one of the really key questions that I think industry and creators are looking at, which is the use of copyrighted data in training advanced models. So that's also a very difficult policy question that we're hoping to grapple with.
There are a lot of them, certainly. We had a question in the chat that somewhat dovetails with where I was going to go with this next question for Jayne and Christian. The regulatory environment with respect to AI, it's not just federal, it's local, it's at the state level, it's national, it's global. Can you just talk to us a little bit about your respective efforts along each front, and where you're finding the trickiest, most difficult problems? Jayne, maybe you could kick us off there.
Sure. And I think this is a great question to ask. And partially, just like AI is sort of becoming everywhere now, so are the consultations. So Saf mentioned a few of them, but those are only some of the ones. There are other agencies within the U.S. government, as you mentioned, at the state and local level, and then the global arena as well. So we're engaging in those consultations. We're also a member of the Safety Institute that he mentioned, the National AI Research Resource. But we're trying to also not only answer the consultations and engage on those, but then to also make sure that we're internalizing that. We've had a responsible AI effort within the company. I think we started in 2016 or 2017. We take it very seriously to make sure that all of the processes around our development of AI, sort of meet our standards, which I believe are quite high. And we want to make sure those continue to be informed by these consultations. I think the trickiest is actually that sheer number. It is constant right now, and it's very difficult to be able to engage. And of course, whenever you have local, state, and federal, there's also the issue of potential preemption or not. I think that will be something that we will see on an ongoing basis. And then in terms of the efforts themselves, one of the things we really see some of the discussion struggling with is sort of the definitions or the scope. What pieces are within scope or out of scope, and then how to balance the risk and the innovation. I think we see that in a variety of geographies. It's really easy to focus on the risk and to really think through what is the appropriate definition for those. I think those are some of the biggest issues that the policymakers are grappling with right now.
Yeah, certainly. Christian?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd just underscore the point that Jayne made. I'm not sure if there's really been a study on it, but I kind of assume that there's a strong correlation between the number of news articles about a subject and the sort of volume of legislation and regulatory activity that we see. So, I mean, I think everyone watching is probably inundated every day with 1 million articles about AI. And that's translating in just an explosion of legislative and regulatory activity. Just at the sort of state level here in the US alone, there are currently, I think, more than 400 bills being debated to do all sorts of different things on AI. We're seeing similar activity, obviously, both in Congress and then internationally. So I think in terms of the challenge as a big multinational company, one of the core challenges for us will be simply working with all of these different entities to make sure that the regulations themselves are interoperable and that we're not put in a position of sort of having compliance requirements in one market that would be place us out of compliance with a requirement that might exist in another market. In the US, our long-term hope is obviously for there to be sort of a federal approach on these issues that would help resolve some of the sort of questions that are being asked at the state level. But honestly, I think, we're seeing some good signs in Congress right now. Both the Senate and now the House have announced sort of task force to take these issues on. But I think anyone who's been watching Congress for the last 6 to 10 years would understand that the safe bet is that probably Congress will not be passing big legislation to deal with these issues anytime soon. And so we'll be continuing to grapple, but at the state level. I will say we've been super impressed with what the administration has been doing in the absence of legislation to try and drive consensus on some of these issues. Last summer, we were super proud to be among the 7 companies that endorsed the voluntary White House commitments that set out really pretty ambitious goals and that each of our companies will be seeking to undertake as it relates to sort of content provenance and watermarking and red teaming of our most advanced models. And we've seen already that those commitments have been built upon in the executive order that Saif referenced earlier. And we've also seen how this sort of having a forward-leading approach from the administration has translated into sort of driving consensus internationally. At the G7, for instance, the AI code of conduct that was a big part of the G7 last year, in many ways mirrors a lot of the content and the obligations that were part of the voluntary White House commitments and later the EO. So we've seen how when the US has sort of formal policy on issues, it helps put the US in sort of the driver's seat globally to drive consensus on some of these difficult issues in ways that I think redound to the benefit ultimately of US companies, because as I think, Frank, at the outset, you mentioned, a lot of the innovation in this space is being driven from the US and the Bay Area specifically, but shout out also to Seattle headquarters for my company as well. But point being that, we think that ultimately, if the US is going to be driving the innovation, we're best suited to figure out the smartest ways to regulate the technology to ensure that we're managing the risks, but in a way that's really going to allow innovation to thrive.
Yeah, thank you, Christian. That's actually an excellent transition into where I wanted to go next with Saif. The US isn't the only country that's racing to develop, deploy, and commercialize AI in a variety of ways. And not all global players are going to have the same interest in putting in place protections for its responsible use. We live in a digital world, so how does developing standards and regulations for the United States address some of those competitive issues and threats from elsewhere?
Yeah, thanks, Frank. So first, I'll address that last bit about the threats and specifically the national security threats. Obviously, BIS, which is within Commerce, has a fairly substantial role in this area, and we've, of course, rolled out a series of export controls starting in 2022 and most recently updated in October of 2023 on advanced semiconductors that are useful for developing and deploying advanced AI, as well as kind of some of the inputs, including the manufacturing equipment needed to make those inputs. And so, we obviously see a really kind of essential national security issue that we have to address with respect to any kind of adversary or competitor governments. So that's one element of our strategy. But of course, I think your question was really more about kind of the broader regulatory and standard setting piece. I think Christian really hit the nail on the head with saying, when the United States is able to, the US government is able to kind of do a lot of the difficult work of defining the substance, it is really something that there's actually just enormous demand across the globe, where these are really, really difficult policy challenges about what should be the technical foundation and the substance of what appropriate red teaming looks like and the appropriate safety benchmarks, all of this stuff. I think the United States is really in a unique position here in obviously the level of expertise we have in our entire ecosystem, having a lot of the leading AI companies. So we really are in a great position to set the standard there. And I think the executive order, I would say the one key theme around the executive order, there's not actually an enormous amount of really hard regulation. A lot of what the work in the executive order is an information gathering exercise, an exercise to develop that technical foundation and the substance so that whatever comes in the future will be smart and well tailored on the regulatory side. And of course, there's just that huge demand signal for that substance. And it's especially true in the US AI Safety Institute, where it's really tasked with developing a lot of that. And I think there are allies and partners and other governments out there that are just looking to that. The other piece is, given that we're not the only country racing to develop this technology, is that we absolutely want a level playing field. Obviously, American companies have taken the lead in making really important voluntary commitments, but we think it's critical that every company in the world that is developing technology at that level should be making the same kind of commitments. And so that's really a critical part of our strategy and making sure that those standards are aligned.
Thanks, Saif. Yeah, Christian, you mentioned perhaps unlikelihood that we'll see any meaningful legislation happen. I think that's, if I venture a guess, that's probably a safe bet based on how we've seen legislation not materialize around a range of other technologies over the years. But, this technology is advancing at what seems like light speed. Yeah, and the consumer-facing applications that we see today that seems so magical and incredible. These are just a glimmer of what's already in the pipeline, let alone what's to come as this space matures. So, Jayne, maybe you could help us out here on this. How do we make sure that policymakers are up to speed so they aren't regulating yesterday's issues? So, we're actually on top of this and approaching it appropriately.
Well, first, I want to just call out one other side of this as well. I think sometimes what we've seen in some jurisdictions, we end up with some really overly broad definitions because the policymakers are trying to make sure that they're regulating every possible permutation. And when you get into a risk-based approach, right, it's really important to, if you go overly broad, that really focuses this, it diffuses the discussion, right? And I think it's really important for us to have a common understanding around the areas of concern. So that way, when we're discussing issues, we're not discussing every possible permutation or every possible application, but instead saying, look, these are the ones of concern. We don't need to come in and talk about AI and 5G network orchestration because there's not going to be an impact on a human. There's only upside on that. It's just going to improve performance. So let's figure out the areas of concern and then go into the deeper discussions on those and figure out how to make sure that we're addressing and mitigating the risk from those. And so I think that's probably the big piece that I'd like to get across in this is that understanding of let's have the discussions, let's figure out what those areas of concern are, and then really focus the discussion there. And those things can be brought into things like the Safety Institute. I do want to call out one other thing because I think the point about standards is really important. International standards do give us the ability to bring the experts into the discussion instead of every venue. Right now, just like we have domestically, globally, the number of venues and trying to figure out which ones matter. So I do also want to just give a shout out for international standards and doing some of the work there.
Christian, anything to add?
Sorry, your question was a great one. Essentially, sort of how do we make sure that regulation isn't addressing yesterday's issues as the technology has progressed? I think we saw a great sort of case in point of exactly that with the EU AI Act, which was being debated for about 3 years and was really close to being finalized in the middle of last year, when they, like everyone else, had sort of an OMG moment when they saw ChatGPT, which really sort of brought into question many of the fundamental structures of what had been being debated in the EU AI Act. And there was sort of a recognition oh my God, this whole structure we've created doesn't account for what seems like it's going to be the new kind of paradigm for AI. And so, yeah, it is a fundamental challenge of trying to regulate in such a highly dynamic space. So I think, it's important for us as industry to be partnering with government to just keep them abreast of sort of where the technology is going, and to work with them really, I think, ideally on sort of regulatory structures that are not as tethered to specific technological constructs and are sort of more based, more governance based and less sort of technology specific. In many cases, a lot of the concerns around AI have technology neutral protections that are already embedded in law. A lot of our anti-discrimination laws, for instance, are, they're not based on any specific technology. There's just a prohibition on making decisions as a business that could affect consequential aspects of someone's life in a discriminatory manner. Obviously, there's a need to update those sort of sector-specific regulations at times, but oftentimes there's not going to be a need for an AI-specific anti-discrimination law. And I think increasingly in the US, that's what we're hearing also from a lot of the regulatory agencies that have remit over these issues. Lena Khan at the FTC has spoken quite a bit about how existing laws apply to AI and provide a lot of the safeguards that she thinks is necessary. Figuring out how to enforce those laws in an AI-driven world, I think, is obviously remains a bit of a challenge, and that folks are really deeply invested in working on. And then just to sort of underscore both points that Jayne and Saif had made, driving the standards around this technology is going to play a key role in a lot of these challenges. And both within NIST at the AI Safety Institute, but then global standards at ISO, which we hope will serve as the basis of any future regulations in the US or internationally, to ensure that if there are going to be requirements around transparency or risk management, we want to make sure that those terms and those concepts and sort of those requirements mean similar things in different jurisdictions.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think that's also an interesting point. This is not simply a conversation between organizations, companies, and regulators, right? This is also a big conversation happening among organizations working in similar spaces, or potentially the same spaces, or wildly divergent spaces, that all have a significant stake in the game. Maybe could you just kind of tell us about how you're navigating that side of this conversation, among the Intels and AWSs and Anthropics and OpenAIs and Microsoft and so on and so forth of the world? Jayne?
Well, I think Intel, like some of the other countries, well, the ones with a longer history perhaps, but the new ones, welcome to the discussions. So Intel has a really long history of contributing to standards. It's part of basically our DNA. And so we will continue to engage in those discussions. And, I think from the perspective of, so what can we do? It's really important to make sure we try to drive towards alignment of those international standards as well. So to continue to contribute, bring the experts together in forums and let them, bring those contributions and have the discussions and try to have an international standard in as many areas as possible. So like right now, I think in terms of ISO IEC, you see some work going on there. We appreciate the work that NIST does in coordinating in the US participation in terms of that. Then in terms of the regulations piece though, I think really we want to make sure that we're maximizing the benefits to our societies, but then also addressing those areas of concern and really making sure that we are making informed decisions. We being, well, in this case, the government, making informed decisions around the scope of things, what the language says, and then also the feasibility. So Christian was just talking about like a lot of great points, but when you do get into regulation itself, making sure that it's actually feasible to be able to show compliance, and that the mechanisms that you have are things that can actually be done, and that everybody knows sort of what they're supposed to do in this space. A lot to unpack there. Tried to do it very quickly, sorry.
That's okay. Christian or Saif, anything to add?
Just to briefly add, I think, again, because it's such a fast-moving technological space where at times, regulations are always going to be chasing the latest innovation, I think it makes it all the more important for companies to be sort of really leaning in and trying to work collaboratively with one another, but also with governments to establish norms even before sort of regulations exist. A lot of this technology is still really nascent. And so at this stage, for a lot of the things that people are understandably concerned about, it's going to be hard to draft stringent regulation before we kind of establish the norms first, and then build out those norms through research that can inform standards that then inform kind of regulation. So, a couple of practical examples. I had referenced earlier the voluntary White House AI commitments was a really important process last summer. More recently, we were really proud to join the Munich Tech Accord, which was a sort of at the Munich Security Council, or there was sort of a large number of companies have sort of stepped up to say, what they will do in the lead up to a lot of really important global elections that are coming up to battle misinformation and ensure that their generative AI systems, mitigate the risk that they could be used to generate disinformation that could, in a worst case scenario, sway an election. So it's really important that we're all sort of doing this work collaboratively. And, it seems to be going pretty well right now. I think the next step is through institutions like the AI Safety Institute in the US. We're seeing several other countries that are also establishing AI safety institutes that are going to be really focused on the research that will support like how we are testing frontier models for potentially dangerous capabilities. Like this is all of the really crucial foundational research that is going to be needed to ultimately support regulatory structures. But it's still like much like the technology, still somewhat in the early days yet, which I know can be frustrating at times. Certainly when we talk to policymakers, but I think this is the important work that will be needed in order to create regulatory structures, to Jayne's point, that are technically coherent and feasible for companies, but that ultimately are also meaningful for consumers and the public.
Yeah, thank you for that. I want to turn to a question from one of our audience members, Michelle Moskowitz from the University of California. And she makes the point that there's just an avalanche of state level legislation coming down in California, but as you said, Christian, around the country. What's the best role for states at this stage in the game? And Saif, maybe you could jump in as well on how can the federal government and industry kind of help our state lawmakers to play a productive role?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, obviously, one of the dynamics that we've always seen is kind of state governments are kind of an experimental ground to try different approaches. And it is a thing that we can see what works and doesn't work. But at the end of the day, having an aligned standard around the country with like a federal standard is ultimately, like probably in this space, a useful landing zone. But yeah, I think it's going to be critical to have that kind of engagement and information kind of exchange, especially if there are state level regulators that are learning like certain lessons from the way that they've gone. And I think absolutely the federal government should be looking at that and learning.
Jayne?
To be honest, there's my concern is, do we have enough bandwidth to actually go and engage on every one of these and make sure, right? Like we're trying to bring information so that policymakers understand that we're able to have the discussions on the areas of concern. And it's just, right now it's frankly overwhelming, just the sheer number. So to engage wherever we can, to have those discussions so that policymakers sort of understand this environment. And as Christian was just saying, like it's so fast moving, to make sure that we're able to bring to light some of the things that are going on. So maybe that does address some of the concerns, because, if once you jump straight to a regulation, it's really hard to sort of unwind and go back and make sure you haven't sort of stifled innovation needlessly. So to understand what the concerns are, to see if the mechanisms are in place now, and then sort of come up with a subset of things that really, like, let's focus that energy there instead of 450 bills. I think Christian said earlier, right? Like, can we get to the ones to the areas of most concern and see if we can address those? But I understand the concerns, and we want to engage everywhere. It's just that everywhere feels pretty overwhelming right now.
It certainly is, and I want to come back to Michelle's question. She had a follow-up regarding fundamental research and our academic institutions, role in that work. And Saif, I've heard Secretary Raimondo, speak repeatedly on this topic and say how important this is going to be What role can industry play in helping to facilitate that the resources that need to be brought to bear on this level of a priority for national security, economic competitiveness, and everything else?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely the case that America is competitive because our companies are the most innovative. And so obviously that's just a critical element. I'll speak specifically to kind of the partnerships that we potentially see with the government. I just want to call out specifically the US AI Safety Institute Consortium, which kind of gets at kind of some of the issues we were discussing earlier about like staying ahead of the technology. I think it just requires constant industry engagement. A lot of the times what we're doing is having an RFI and we get a comment in, or we have like, one discussion here and another discussion there. But what I really like about the consortium is it's kind of a real-time collaboration on a lot of the development of the standards and the guidelines and testing approaches and benchmarks. And it's really a place kind of more broadly, not just on that kind of safety research and evaluation research side, but like it's a place for generally just research to kind of thrive and best practices to be shared for all of the stakeholders to come together. So there's a role for the government in kind of being a convener to share those best practices. Of course, there's also kind of one of the examples I want to point out, not at the Department of Commerce, but with the National Science Foundation, is the creation of the National AI Research Resource. There is a role for government to play to just kind of provide resources that will allow kind of smaller innovators, universities or small businesses to just have a playground where they can innovate and prototype different technologies. And so that's one effort we have there. We have the National Semiconductor Technology Center, which is kind of a similar concept, but in the semiconductor domain. Create a place where there's lots of tools, where lots of different innovators that maybe don't have access now can get over that kind of activation energy to be able to innovate. So that's a key role that we see government playing, but obviously, at the end of the day, a huge amount of the innovation is just going to come from kind of private investment in research and development, and we obviously just a great interest in continuing to promote an environment that allows businesses to thrive and be able to invest. So
that's right. We're entering the home stretch here, and I had a couple of questions that may be a little more speculative, maybe more fun. You can be the judge, but I did want to know, there are the headline issues that everyone who reads is dialed into. So media authenticity and provenance, big deal. Privacy and copyright issues, labor market disruption, national security risks. We're well aware of those things. I'd like to ask each of you, because you're all deeply immersed in this world and you're coming at it from different perspectives, what's something important that everyone watching today should be paying attention to in this space, but maybe they're not thinking about it already? Christian, I start with you.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think one of the things that sort of being inundated every day with so much news about AI can sort of callous you to is just like how early days it still is for the technology. It feels like we are so, all we do is read about AI every day. You can really lose sight of how, nascent the technology remains, and, how early it is even for the business models around generative AI. And so I think the other sort of challenge is that, unlike past technological revolutions, a lot of this research and technology is being driven by just, a handful of companies. And so there's a real information asymmetry between some of the companies and government, and increasingly even in the academic sector. So I think investments in the core infrastructure and institutions that are going to improve knowledge diffusion is ultimately to the benefit of everyone. So, I think fortunately we have not had a drinking game for this session, but I want to give another shout out to the AI Safety Institute and the National AI Research Resource as two really important mechanisms that this administration has stood up that I think is going to really work to the benefit of companies, both large and small, and aid in this sort of knowledge diffusion that we're ultimately going to need if we want to continue to sort of lead in the information economy.
Jayne?
Yeah, actually, when you first asked the question, the first thing I thought of was my knee-jerk reaction was what's lost is sort of the benefits. We instantly go to all of the concerns, and we're not seeing the applications and the use cases that are actually driving the benefits for our society. And like a knowledge of the collaborative work, not to Christian's drinking game analogy here, but we're heavily engaged in those because, and the question before from Michelle, the follow-up question, engage in those discussions, in those forums. So there's a central place for them, so we can understand the concerns. We can make sure we're mitigating risks. We're addressing those areas of concern and really putting the focus on those. Super important. There's, the watermarking and provenance issue that you raised, right? Well, we've already, along with other companies, I think Christian, I think AWS is involved as well. There's a content and provenance authentication group where we're working together collaboratively on industry standards to try to drive things, solutions in the space. So like when we see a problem, you see it, you try to fix it, right? And so we're aware of them. We're trying to fix them, make sure that there's an industry standard out there that people can adopt, things like that. And I think sometimes that gets lost in discussion because we're instantly looking at every possible, like, oh, there's the risk here, there's a risk there. And I do think it's to Christian's point, because it is so early in terms of early days of the technology. But it is the first thing I thought when you said that was like, what about the benefits?
Really is incredible when you stop and think about it for a minute. Saif, what about from United States economic competitiveness or national security perspective? What should we be thinking about that maybe we're overlooking at this stage of the game?
Yeah, I don't know if this is really kind of specific to kind of U.S. government, economic competitive national security, but kind of what like really jumps out at me is that, I think we're really in a phase of kind of an exponential trend in this technology, but our brains are programmed to think linearly, and so we don't notice how fast things are moving. I mean, one thing to think about, which is kind of crazy, is like the basic like algorithms that we're using for these most advanced models, they've existed for quite a long time, for a couple of decades. There's obviously been some really key innovations on like transformers, which came out, around 2017 or so. But that was kind of like modifying an existing paradigm. But like what really has driven progress, like to a significant degree, has been, literally from early, about 10 years ago, like the most advanced models that we are developing today use 10 to the power of 10 times more compute. That's like 1 with 10 zeros, just more computational power that has been dumped in. Similarly with the amount of data that we've been dumping in. And what we've just seen is that the models continue to get better as we're going on this exponential. And the thing is, that has not really shown signs of petering out. And I think we're still within that exponential, and we don't know where it's going to take us in terms of the incredible like benefits that it's going to have, like the AI for good piece that Jayne was mentioning, but also just like what harmful capabilities come. Like we just have no idea what's coming. It's kind of exciting, but it's also we have to, as governments, like from a security standpoint, like be on top of it and really like try to project wherever we can where it's going. But it really does feel like different from a lot of other areas, just the speed at which it's moving. And I think a lot of people are just going to be surprised where we are in like 5 or 10 years. We've been surprised repeatedly, even on the span of months. So it's hard to imagine where we're going to be along those longer time frames.
It really, really is. To your point, Jayne, about let's focus on the benefits here. I'd like to close it out on a very upbeat, optimistic note, and just ask each of you within your respective worlds, what is the thing that you're most optimistic about in this space as it pertains to the work that you're doing? Christian, we'll come back to you.
Again, I think what I'm most optimistic about is sort of watching a lot of these prototypes and proof of concepts that companies are toying around with now with generative AI, which has really only happened in the last 12 months or so. Those moving from POCs to actual deployment and being used at scale in ways that is going to sort of enhance the productivity of the American industry, and then also ultimately benefit the public. I think specifically really optimistic to see how AI is going to help solve some of the sort of healthcare challenges that we've all been grappling with. There's tremendous opportunity there and still really early days.
Jayne?
Similar to Christian, I think it's the possibilities to really help try to address some of society's greatest challenges. One of our founders at Intel had a saying, and it's emblazoned on our walls, so it's actually, sticks in your memory. It's don't be encumbered by history. Go off and do something wonderful. And so, this is a tool, and maybe this technology can really help us in terms of some of the possibilities of things that it can bring to bear and some of the benefits.
Thank you for that. That's a great piece of wisdom to keep in mind. Saif?
Yeah, I mean, one way to think about AI is that it really is a general purpose technology that is an accelerator of everything. It's like on par with like fire or electricity. And so like it's hard to pick one area, but I think like all the things that we think are good, AI has an ability to accelerate all of those things. And so that is just a very exciting prospect. I'll just kind of focus on one very narrow area. One of the really key efforts under the executive order is really to enhance the US government's use of AI. I really have some hope that it could be a really a game changer in the way that bureaucracy operates to make us more nimble and agile. So that is something that I think we're really working on. There's a real push to hire kind of more AI technical expertise in government. If you're interested, please come join us. But also just find out the processes to really encourage wide adoption and see where that takes us in terms of kind of government capacity and efficiency. So I'm really hopeful for that.
Thank you. Saif, Christian, Jayne, thank you so much for joining us for this discussion. I really appreciate the opportunity to sit down and for you all to share your perspectives with everybody watching. I also like to say that if you're looking for more AI today, there's an in-person event tonight from 5 to 7 p.m. on board the Bay Area Council's floating headquarters, the Klamath, where Vets in Tech will be launching a new initiative focused on opportunities in AI for veterans. So to register, I believe we can put that in the chat, and you'll be able to take this discussion to the next level later in person today if you so choose. Thank you to everybody who joined us, to our panelists once again, and we look forward to seeing you on our next installment of this series. Bye-bye.